the military transitioned to all-volunteer forces in 1973, there have been 3 years when they fell short of recruitment goals. As 2022 comes to a close, it looks like that number will soon increase to 4. In fact, military officials are saying that 2022 has been the most challenging recruiting year since 1973. For people working in this sector, this news comes as no surprise. Katherine Kuzminski is a senior fellow and director of the Military Veterans of Society program at the Center for a New American Security. She points out that the U.S. Army specifically has been struggling with recruiting since 2017.
In part, it's because the Army is the largest recruiting force across the armed services. We also see some challenges across all of the services, usually towards the end of each fiscal year. But in the recent past, the other services have been able to meet their recruiting targets.
Until now, the Navy and Air Force are also struggling to meet recruiting goals this year. The Marine Corps, which is the smallest service branch in the military, usually has no problems with recruiting, but this year it's taking a bit longer than usual. But doing worst of all is the U.S. Army. This sector has fallen short of this year's recruiting goal by 25%, or 15,000 soldiers. So what's leading to these lower-than-average numbers? Kuzminski says it's partially due to the pandemic.
The most lucrative recruiting outlets tend to be those in-person experiences. So high school campus visits, college campus visits, and then also the availability of recruiters at storefront models, right? So you see a lot of recruiting stations around the country in strip malls or in the middle of population centers, which make it easier for individuals to come in who might be interested in military service. So those avenues were for a long time really closed for recruiting with respect to the pandemic. And then the other thing that we've seen is that because high school students, which are the target population, were experiencing remote school, they weren't able to have those experiences like their high school prom, their high school graduation, experiencing their senior years. We saw a lot of them just delaying life decisions.
She adds that another life decision being delayed is college. The promise of free tuition has historically been a big reason for why many enlist after high school. If they aren't sure if they want to pursue this path, it may not make sense to enlist. On top of this, many young people today are hesitant to join because of the increased awareness around the risk of injury, death, or developing psychological problems like PTSD. Kuzminski says that many Americans today aren't as exposed to military life or hear firsthand stories from veterans themselves. Much of what the public knows about service comes from the media.
And part of that is that we see military installations tend to be further from big population centers. So as we see successive generations of people who've volunteered to serve in the military as opposed to being drafted to serve in the military, there's fewer youth who actually engage with someone who's served in the military. And so they might not see it as an avenue of service.
Young people who are more progressive may also feel like they don't fit into conservative military culture. On top of this, kids now reaching the age of eligibility grew up during the years-long wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, which some people felt were unjustified pursuits.
There was also a view of a clear enemy for a long time. So during the Cold War, Russia was always the threat, certainly the way that Iraq and Afghanistan were laid out. And in the last couple of years, with the drawdown of the wars in Iraq and Afghanistan, we don't really see a unifying factor for Americans about who the threat or the enemy truly is.
Interestingly, Kuzminski adds that the release of Top Gun: Maverick produced a big bump in military signups this year. She says that the movie was successful in pushing patriotic themes and the strength of the U.S. military. Additionally, the film positively portrays veterans and how they're treated by society. This differs from what the public commonly hears from the media.
George Washington essentially said, how you treat your veterans will directly impact the quality of your recruits in the future. And so part of the life cycle of service is ensuring that we're caring for veterans, and that feeds directly back into people's perceptions of what military service may look like. Thinking about the perception of rates of PTSD or veteran homelessness or the veteran suicide rate do leave an impression on those influencers in the lives of potential recruits and may also sway the individual recruits themselves.
In the face of these challenges, Kuzminski says that the military is working hard to improve the support veterans receive.
There's certainly been initiatives to address issues of mental health among the military. There's also, in the last couple of years, been some tough press for the military services about military family financial instability or food insecurity. And so the Department of Defense, Congress, and then the individual military services have really taken to heart ways to help particularly junior enlisted service members with families meet the demands of inflation and rising housing costs that were really affecting them over the last couple of years, to mitigate those negative effects and enable those individuals to focus on military readiness, which is the goal.
While there are plenty of reasons why military recruitment is on a decline, the consequences are far wider than many realize. With fewer new recruits, the military may struggle to find its next batch of leaders in the next 20, 30, or even 40 years.
Military service is a closed profession. So the individuals who either enlist on the enlisted side or who commission on the officer side today are the future leaders that we see 40 years from now. So if we look for, the future chief of staff of the Army is being for the year 2063 is being recruited today. And so if you miss your recruiting targets in any of the services today, there's long-term effects. And it's difficult. It's not like other companies in America where you could go recruit excellent new leader or a new CEO from another company. Military is a closed system. And so it's more complicated to build that experience and build that pipeline over time.
And with fewer people, the U.S. military might struggle to retain its strength. For years, politicians have boasted that the U.S. military is the strongest in the world. But with dwindling recruitment numbers, there's a chance for a powerhouse like China to gain this title.
A couple of ways that the United States has demonstrated its military might, part of it has been through our technological advancement and our operational planning, and that remains. But the reality is that it comes down to the decision and the contributions of individual human beings. And so any complication in having that human perspective and that manpower really hinders overall military operations, no matter how technologically savvy or advanced we might be.
With all this being said, it's clear that the U.S. needs to find a way to drive greater recruitment. Part of this means changing the organization's public perception and fostering greater inclusion. Another aspect is helping those who want to enlist but don't yet meet the criteria.
The Army in particular is trying to address that Venn diagram of individuals who are interested or who have a propensity to serve, but who might not make the standards, whether it's their education levels or their physical fitness. So what the Army's doing is they're bringing them to Fort Jackson and assisting them for about 6 weeks to increase their ASVAB scores on the academic side, or helping them meet those height weight standards and meet those PT requirements. And so it's really capitalizing on, there are people who are interested who didn't previously meet the standard, but now we can help them in the process of meeting the standard.
Another barrier the Army is addressing is lack of interest. Many young people today view joining the military as signing up for war. And while many soldiers see combat, there are also many who don't. Additionally, joining the military can come with benefits like free housing, food, and health care. Overall, Kuzminski says the armed forces have to do a better job of portraying service as a viable, lifelong, and successful career.
We're trying to recruit eligible 17 to 21 to 24, 28-year-olds who are willing to serve. But I think another piece is really who influence those American youth. So thinking about military service as a viable option for parents when they're thinking about options for their kids, for school counselors, principals, teachers, coaches, building a true picture of what service looks like and how military service can fit into a really fulfilling career path.
To find out more about this topic and our featured guest, Katherine Kuzminski, visit viewpointsradio.org. For more behind the scenes, check out Viewpoints Radio on Twitter and Facebook. This segment was written and produced by associate producer Grace Galanti. Our executive producer is Amira Zaveri. Studio production by Jason Dickey. I'm Marty Peterson. Coming up next week.
Amazon seems totally invincible. I think, last year Facebook seemed totally invincible, and then it went all meta on us and seems highly invincible at this point.
Exploring the decline of another seemingly invincible company, General Electric. Then,
the waitress will bring this big slab of cream pie to the table, and just like you look to the table next to you and you look over and say, I want a piece of that.
You're gonna need to grab a piece of pie after this story. I'm Marty Peterson.
And I'm Gary Price. These stories in depth on your public affairs magazine, Viewpoints.
And that's Viewpoints for this week. Follow us on Twitter, Facebook, and Instagram to learn more about upcoming shows and find a library of past programs on Apple Podcasts, Google Play, and Spotify. Plus, you'll always find previous segments and more information about our guests at viewpointsradio.org. Join us again next week for another edition of Viewpoints.